Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This morning, I am very excited to talk to Jayn Steele, who is an expert in food addiction. And you're going to see why I fell in love with her content very shortly. Jane, hi and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's such a pleasure to be invited and to get to know you and share, hopefully, what will be helpful.
Thank you. I'm sure it will be. So, Jean, can you share a little bit with our audience your background and how you discovered the notion of food addiction and how that led you to eventually become this expert in this field?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you, Sarah. It's been a lifelong thing for me. I'm 51 now, and I've been in recovery for a few years. And oh goodness, if I go back into my childhood, that's of course where everything seems to start. It looked like a really normal childhood and very privileged, actually. I was raised by a doctor and a nurse. I was adopted at birth and so really wanted, by my parents and had everything provided for me. And yeah, really, really blessed to have that privileged background. Now, my mother had had an eating disorder when she was in her late teens, anorexia and bulimia. And both of my parents, obviously, doctor and nurse, they're quite high achieving and uh, um, yeah, health conscious and wanted to provide obviously the best environment. And one of the ways that my mother had recovered was to adopt whole food eating and to be really conscientious about family meals and 3 meals a day and that sort of thing. So I feel very lucky that I did not develop any food addiction symptoms, particularly when I was growing up. And there wasn't a lot of sugar or junk food or anything in the house. That being said, later, in my 40s, when I was really bottoming out in what I now know was a food addiction, I was obsessed with certain types of food and would exhibit like foraging like behavior as a 2, 3, 4 year old, like toothpaste. There was sweetener in toothpaste, and I used to eat that. Children's aspirin, those had to be kept well away from me because and vitamin C, those little orange tablets, I would eat those. I was obsessed with apple juice. I remember being a little kid, barely verbal, swinging on the door, begging for apple juice. And I also remember being a little kid going around on the countertops looking for this little pink cup on Saturday mornings, before anybody else would wake up, because sometimes there would be a pack of juicy fruit gum in there. And if I found that, I would eat all of them. So I was hardwired out, even not really having had much exposure to it, sugar that is, to seek it out in whatever way I could. And it got more obvious later as a teen, but not immediately. For me, it was more alcohol and other drugs, where my addictiveness came out initially, and then it morphed more into a food addiction later when I cleaned up from alcohol and other drugs. This part is on my website. If anybody's kind of interested in reading the whole story, I can give you the details of that later. But for me, my addiction to alcohol and other drugs started around age 11 or 12, and it was when I came into recovery for that that the food addiction really went through the roof. And I was diagnosed as having an eating disorder. And at the time, well, I've been through eating disorder recovery treatment programs twice. It was bulimia, anorexic subtype. So I was obsessed with being thin and with losing weight and with dieting. And of course, when I couldn't maintain that, the binging and purging would be the way that I would get that result. Not that I was ever overweight, and hopefully we can come back to this a little bit later. I've recently discovered some more information about anorexic type behaviors that are addictive. Yeah, anyway, we can talk about that more later. But what happened for me was that the binging and purging came to be an addiction in and of itself. And anyway, it turned sort of into a big spirally mess in my 20s. I came into 12-step recovery for my drug and alcohol addiction. Then I had to address this eating disorder stuff. Had it mostly in remission in terms of like being weight restored, but still always had this noise at the back of my head, like wanting to diet and always feeling, 10 to 15 or yeah, feeling like I was 10 to 15 pounds overweight. And the type of treatment that I went through eating disorder recovery was the food guide, right? Like 3 meals, 3 snacks, very carbohydrate based. And so I always felt constantly hungry, and again, a little bit heavier than what I wanted to be. And yeah, so I had about a 15-year remission in the binging and purging. But again, what I realize now is that I substituted addictions, which was that sort of weight dieting, binging, purging, over to work and sort of compulsive busyness and perfectionism with school and making money and developing my career. And then it kind of came back a few years later when I entered into another 12-step program that had to do with that had more to do with food. I had been a member of other 12-step programs that were more focused on drug and alcohol recovery, but this was more specifically focused on food, because what I noticed during that 15 years of remission, we'll loosely call it remission, for my bulimia, that I was getting more and more obsessed with certain foods. Like I'd eat a little bit of something and then find that if it was in the house, it would yell at me from the cupboards until I went and finished it. And that was getting worse. And I was getting, spending more and more time preoccupied with this. And then a friend of mine that I knew from a drug and alcohol 12-step program told me about this weighing and measuring, no flour, no sugar 12-step food program. And I remember perking my ears up and going, because she had a lot of weight to lose, and this was mostly a program for people who wanted to lose weight from compulsive eating. And I was like, well, I don't particularly have a lot of weight to lose, maybe 5-10 pounds, maybe, but I just want this obsession to go away, right? Like, will it help with that? And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, well, I'm going to join it with you. So I did. And that was the first time I ever put together the link between the sugar and flour, and started eating like 3 succinct meals a day. My eating habits were quite bad. I was kind of one of these constant grazers, really high carb, like healthy carbs, like whole wheat, whatever, popcorn, that sort of thing, muffins, bran muffins, that kind of thing, but would constantly be, again, hungry, snacking, thinking about food, a little bit overweight, hangry, and this obliterated that, and it substituted it with like meat and vegetables and some fats, and that worked for me for a while. It was actually quite amazing, the clarity that happened when I eliminated flour and sugar, and it worked, I would say, for about 18 months. And then what I started noticing was, well, my weight dropped, but I was still always hungry and gassy, and still had some cravings and would feel stuffed. Like we ended up having to really bulk up my food plan because it was quite low fat, really high veggie. And so I'd feel stuffed but never satiated. And then I had all these other sort of mood issues, still kind of thinking about food, still a bit cranky, cold all the time, and anemic. That was the other thing. Anyway, so I and it was quite a restrictive program as well. If you ate outside of these, your 3 meals a day, you'd have to reset your recovery and go back to day 1, and you couldn't share in meetings, and it was a little bit punitive, and it created a bit of obsessive behavior. So I left that program, and somewhere in there I had a relapse into binging and purging. And it was wild, Sarah. Like it reawoke those old neural addictive pathways. And then, for several years after that compulsion to repeat that behavior as an addictive process started again, and I started looking for recovery. Anyway, I know this is a very long answer to your question, but I discovered the whole notion of food addiction when I'd gotten some counseling and loved it, and then started doing some counselor training at a place called The Haven on Gabriola Island in British Columbia. And I met a fellow counselor who had done the INFACT training, which is, you mentioned Vera Tarman, and I can't remember if you mentioned Bitten Jonsson from Sweden, but anyway, it's INFACT is the International Food Addiction Counselor Training out of Iceland, which is led by Esther, I'm going to butcher her last name, Gudmundsdóttir, I think is her last name. And so anyway, my friend had been struggling with overeating and had taken this this counselor training, which also involved treatment for herself. And I thought, this sounds something helpful. I'm going to sign up for that. And that was really the beginning of my real recovery in 2019, which was, I guess, about 4 years ago. I'll stop talking now because maybe you want to ask me some different questions, and we can go into
I love it. I wanted that history, and I
Okay.
wanted everybody to know, the progression, because yeah, it just takes us such a long time before we get to the food addiction. I was wondering with the with the 12-step program, or the programs that were, weighing the food and removing the flour, there was no mention of addiction.
No, there was mention of addiction. So it was a 12-step program, and oh yeah, that's a great question. Where shall I go with that? So a lot of well, I think 12-step recovery is largely cognitive behavioral therapy, with a spiritual wrapper. Spiritual meaning that you come out of a place of isolation and into community with other people, peers who are struggling with the same thing, which is profoundly therapeutic in terms of feeling that identification, resonance with other people, and then getting that hope and inspiration, that by following and taking the example of others who are, getting well, following the same methodology, and one person supporting another, very, very helpful. So there is also the notion that can be more mystical, spiritual within there. Step 2 and step 3 are about that, but largely those are abstinence-based programs, and as being the antidote to addiction. Right. I absolutely believe that for someone who has addiction, moderating is not an option. And what isn't mentioned, though, within the 12-step, and this is something that I learned later in fact, the whole food addiction model, is it's very much focused on the physiology and the neural pathways, and more of the biochemistry versus like the psychology and the emotional part of things. I think all of them factor into an addiction. Actually, I meant to do this. I will read you the definition of addiction from you probably know this already, but your listeners would probably benefit from a reminder of this. Definition of addiction, yeah. So this is according to the American Society of Addiction Medicine. This is their most recent definition from 2011. So addiction is defined as a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experience. So again, it's both of that, emotional, psychological, as well as the physiological.
Right.
Yeah. So people with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors, or both, that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. So once a chemical enters the brain via a substance or behavior, it can cause people to lose control of their impulses or crave a harmful substance or acting out in a harmful behavior. When someone develops an addiction, the brain craves the reward of the substance or process behavior. And this is due to the intense stimulation of the brain's reward system. So people with the disease of addiction respond well to a biopsychosocial spiritual approach to treatment. This strengths-based approach to addiction treatment highlights the individual's inherent resilience and ability to recover. Effective treatment includes, so hopefully this answers your question, abstaining from all addictive substances and behaviors, like stopping them. Also avoiding cue-inducing or triggering environments and people. Reducing stress, improving resilience strategies, so behaviors, thoughts, and then introducing replacement substances, behaviors, environments, and people. So it's huge. It basically means that we have to change everything, and that the recovery process from
Right.
addiction is lifelong, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was the piece that was missing within the 12-step model was the whole chemical, physiological piece.
Right. They don't focus on the organic causes of, how the brain physically changes the dopamine receptors. I talk about this a lot, right? They get destroyed.
Yes.
Yeah. Do they focus on exercise, or is there any mention of like the importance of something like that?
Not usually within the constructs of the suggestions, embedded
The
within the
12.
12-step model.
Yeah.
And there's different 12-step programs for food addiction recovery. As far as I know, there's like at least 12 different ones that focus on different aspects.
Hmm.
So some are like there's Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous, and they believe that the main issue is about control. So their step 0 or step 1 is about relinquishing control and having somebody else give you your food, basically, and then you have to eat all of it. So that is very much not focused on the nutritional, aspect of
Right.
food at all, but rather breaking the idea of I'm going to control what I'm eating.
Mm-hmm.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
There's other ones that focus more on weighing and measuring to stop us from compulsively overeating or undereating,
Yeah.
and then eliminating certain foods. So that model is more focusing on food as a substance
Hmm.
and eliminating the addictive substances, as well as controlling the portions, because that mitigates or puts guardrails around eating as a process, right? Or restricting as a process addiction, because any and all of those can affect the reward centers of the brain. There's a high induced with restricting and dieting,
Yeah.
as well as there's all kinds of serotonin release that have to do with binge eating and having that
Especially
volume in the
receptors.
stomach.
Right.
Yeah. So different ones will focus on different aspects of the addiction, which is
Gotcha.
interesting. And so the exercise part, to answer your question, um, I've been in several 12-step programs that have to do with food. None of them mention it specifically, other than, you have a sponsor typically that you'll communicate with, trying to create a food plan and a lifestyle plan around replacement behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And myself as a clinician, I do recommend exercise in the form of mostly mood enhancing, like getting outside, meditative,
Yeah.
get your heart rate up, bring your
Yeah.
stress down, but not like anything too extreme, because that, again, that can trigger all kinds of
Hmm.
other addictive, obsessive behavior around weight loss and calorie counting and restricting and that sort of thing. So it's a fine line.
I
Yeah.
wanted, thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask you before we delve a little bit into the difference between, addiction and harmful eating. You
Yeah.
mentioned something. You said there's sugar in toothpaste.
I guess there must be, because I was eating it as a kid. I was seeking it out. It's a good
That's
question. Yeah. It certainly
okay.
has a sweet taste, right? Like the sweet minty taste.
Right. Yeah, and generally you don't want to be having any flavors, right? Or even natural flavors in products could potentially trigger an addictive tendency. So that's very interesting.
It really can. And I think it depends on the individual, how sensitive we are, and also how severe the addiction is. I'm personally am someone who is ultra sensitive. I've
Yeah,
got ridiculously severe.
me too.
So, for me, like, even though I've been ketogenic, and I forgot to mention that I've been ketogenic for about 7 years and carnivore for a little over 3 years. And that's been working really well for me in terms of a food plan.
Nice. Oh, I didn't know you were a carnivore. I didn't want to,
Yeah,
I wanted to just like focus on the addiction because I feel like, that's really the future and, that's the biggest key. But that's fantastic that you're doing carnivore.
it's been amazing. It was a game changer for me. And I think, within the carnivore, the keto communities, there's so much focus now on companies who are trying to help us and also be commercially viable. So there's these like keto substitutes, right? Like keto bread and keto sweeteners. And oh my God, we could probably talk for a whole
Yeah.
podcast about that. But yeah, for somebody with addiction, um, who's really sensitive to sweet, it doesn't matter what it does to my insulin or my blood sugar. It's going to give me the craving to want to eat more
It's
because
a
of that
trigger.
sweet taste. Exactly,
Yes.
it's a trigger. So that's why I don't go near any of that stuff. And I find even natural flavors can do the same thing, like a cherry flavor, even
Right.
though it has never been near a cherry, it will still be a trigger. So yeah, whole foods, and for me, ideally like meat and fat only. Vegetables, we can talk about that later if you want, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. And yeah, because when you were saying that you were starting to have issues with like the meat and vegetable program, the first thing that came to my mind, oh, yeah, you should have done, carnivore around that time.
Yeah.
So you figured it out eventually. Yeah, and I think also carnivore, we weren't talking about it, years ago. It wasn't until Dr. Sean Baker, I think, published his book just maybe 4 or 5, no, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that the interviews on Joe Rogan about it started to getting more numerous. And I feel like most of us have watched those interviews. And that's also around the time when I first heard about the carnivore diet, because I was also doing keto and I was also still binging and having those slip ups because I had, funnily enough, doing a dissertation on food addiction, but yet still being
Yes.
oblivious to my own addiction,
Yes.
So yeah, that scares me. If someone like me can be in denial, what chance do people have,
Same thing, Sarah. And this is what I wanted to touch on with you, something I noticed recently over the last few months around anorexia, like what can happen if we lose too much weight. Something can switch over through restriction that can really mess us up in terms of our thinking and behavior and binging and foraging. And I heard recently, because that had happened to me, I was about maybe 8 pounds underweight
Mhm.
and kept noticing that I was slipping into binging and was really obviously concerned about it. But I was hungry, but I didn't notice that's
Right.
what had happened, right? Because I didn't feel hungry, but my body was, sending me into binging mode
Yeah.
every so often, and other kind of bizarre behaviors as well, like real fear, like OCD behavior was really starting to develop as well, and around really being militant about the weighing and measuring. So in some ways, the 12-step programs that do the weighing and measuring can be very helpful. And there's a point, I think, where we can take it too far and it can become another addictive, ritualistic behavior, particularly if we've lost a bit too much weight. So I wanted to highlight that, having just gone through it and then having to bring myself back from there with some professional help as well.
Very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because it triggers that primal part of our brain that says there's not enough food. And so your reward circuits in the brain become more sensitive. So you derive even more, excitement from something that's addictive or some calorically dense food, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a big piece of it. And there's another layer that I wanted to share with you because, again, I just heard of it and it makes so much sense. I don't know if you've heard of a researcher named Sean Giesinger, but she developed a hypothesis that kind of fits in the missing pieces around what you just said and about what we know. It's called the Adapted-to-flee-famine syndrome. It's an evolutionary perspective on anorexia. It's where when we've had a certain amount of weight loss and we feel really good, like the addictive high, and then we get all this energy and start wanting to exercise more,
Yeah.
it's to do with the hypothesis that when there is a famine state, if we're genetically predisposed and we get the epigenetic environment to stimulate this, in other words, famine or weight loss, we get more energy, our appetite goes down, and it's basically so that we can get out there and go and hunt and get more food. So some people will get more sluggish and irritable and tired and hibernate, but those of us with this gene, there's something like 8 different genes that are linked to people who have a tendency towards anorexia.
Mhm.
Even those who don't particularly have a thin idealism component, who develop this, and it's very, very difficult to recover from it once it's been triggered. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting.
Yeah. And that was part of what was happening to me. I felt fine,
Yeah,
but I'd be, binging every so often and be like, well, I'm doing everything in my 12-step program. I'm not eating addictive foods. I feel
right.
like I look great. I'm getting all these compliments, but my body fat had dropped a bit too low, and it was enough to trigger all of that.
That
Yeah,
is
interesting.
very interesting. Yeah. And it's also like a cautionary tale, right? To be careful.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So did we cover this? What is the difference between addiction? I think we haven't addressed it
Not
formally, I
yet.
guess. What's the difference between addiction and harmful eating?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of what I do, when I did the IMFACT training, I then did some more training with Bitten Jonsson, who
Mm,
has a diagnostic tool called Sugar,
yeah.
and that teases out the difference between addiction and harmful eating because it can be really hard to see which it is. So um, basically, a person will have addiction if when presented with addictive substances or behaviors, it creates like a compulsive dissociative trance or craving or obsession, even if you're unintentionally ingesting, whatever it is or doing whatever it is, there's something else that takes over, and that has to do with that whole brain wiring, and we're actually pretty powerless over that, and it seems to be like it's whether like you're left-handed or you have green eyes.
Yeah.
You've either got addiction or you don't. It's not something that's going to go away. If it's a fish allergy, then you've got a fish allergy, right? So that would be addiction, whereas harmful eating could look more like emotional coping or poor habits, um, or lack of awareness or information about
Mm,
the different types of foods or eating or what effect it has on you, which is made even more difficult by the fact that a lot of us get contradictory information and we don't really know, what's good for us and what isn't, right? We're just sort of eat what we eat,
right.
and and we may end up, overweight or in some really bad habits or in addiction like scenarios when in fact if there's some awareness, education, some therapy, some withdrawal, just with the physiology of it,
Yeah.
and then those harmful eaters can usually stay off, those harmful foods. So in other words, if they, accidentally eat, some sugar, it's not going to, have them crave more. They would probably
Mm,
forget about it.
right.
That makes sense.
Whereas
But
if an addict accidentally ingests some sugar, they're gonna have a much, much harder time not obsessing over the food, even it being a trigger.
that's exactly it. Or it goes into a situation where there's other kind of neural pathway connections.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah, that can trigger the whole behavior thing again. Like for me, when I had the binging and purging episode, I don't think it was an intentional thing. I don't know, I think I'd overeaten or something, and it was, and I'd had too much liquid, and I don't know, ran up the stairs. It was like, whoa, kind of, but
right.
just having the act of being full and vomiting woke all of that, neural
Mm,
pathways up again. And then I found myself, whatever it was, a month later, doing it again mysteriously. And then it was 2 weeks later, and then a week. And then, oh my God, now I'm back to doing this every day. How the hell did that happen?
right.
That kind of thing. Yeah,
Okay.
regardless of what the food itself was, it was more the process of it.
Got
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay. So here is my favorite question. Is sugar a hard drug? And is it harder than heroin?
Another excellent question. So there's all kinds of evidence, MRI scans and so on. I think Joan Iflin will probably talk more about this when you speak to her. She's got some great slides of the brain lighting up with animals, humans, under the effect of sugar, more so than cocaine, heroin. And what's interesting about that is everybody seems to be a bit different, right? Like I'm someone who's in recovery from alcohol and other drugs. They don't tempt me at all. right? I mean, that was 27 years ago, almost 28 years ago that I stopped that. I never think about it. I never, like, somewhere within that first year, it just went away. Um, Not so much with food and eating. That can be really, really strong at times where I'm whatever, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, triggered, in some way, looking to escape, emotional.
Yeah.
And I know people who are in recovery though, who are heavy drug addicts, heroin users or whatever, really advanced alcoholics, who I'll go out for dinner with, and they'll have a big piece of chocolate cake and eat 2 bites and get bored of it and leave it. And I'm like, but you're an addict. How can you? But for whatever reason, the sugar doesn't affect them. So it seems to
Right.
be really individual. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's true. I have a student of mine, same thing, doesn't care about the food much, did carnivore easy, no cravings or anything. But, he still has addictive tendencies because I'm always using him as like as an example. You see, genetics does
Yes.
play a part, and he's like, I think you're giving me too much credit because really did have an issue with the gaming, video games, which we know,
Yes.
yeah, they raise dopamine levels as high as amphetamines.
Yes, yes, that's exactly it. And as you, I'm sure know, there's the whole addiction interaction disorder. Something like 88% of us addicts will switch addictions. So we plug one hole up and then we find ourselves doing something else, exactly gambling or shopping or suddenly becoming really interested in sex or whatever, compulsive busyness. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that it can come out. And it is to do with that brain neural pathway, whatever it is, dopamine tendency.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to be aware of all of it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and to really, really focus on when we're in recovery to not be substituting one thing for another, but to
Yeah.
really focus on really healthful replacement attitudes, behaviors
Yeah.
all around, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And to add to that, before I move on to the next topic, it's always crazy to me to think about those studies where the rats will prefer the sweet taste
Yes.
over heroin. And I'm thinking, we're not even caring about pure sugar in our society. It's worse because we care more about the sweet and fat combination, which we know is even far more addictive than
Yes.
just pure hard candy or just pure sugar. So
Yes.
what does that say about exactly how addictive cakes and cookies and combination, high carb or high sweetness, high fat, because in nature, this is very foreign. There is no natural
Yes.
food that ever existed that had both carbs and fats at the same time, you know?
Yes. Yes.
So that scares me a lot, and when I hear people like you and so many other people, same thing that, it's so easy for them to overcome really hard drug addictions or, alcoholism that, but it's just the food addiction that they cannot get over is like all the pieces are falling into place. And it scares me to think just how powerful the food as a drug can be.
Absolutely, yes. And how prevalent and systemic and in denial. I mean, yeah, you probably read or heard of Dr. Robert Lustig, who's written a very good book about this. Metabolical is his most recent one that talks about that conflation of, pharmaceuticals and food companies, high carbohydrates, seed oils. We're sort of creating this solution, if you will, to world hunger with
But
all
not
of this
really.
high carb, but not really, because it's also created this terrible epidemic of obesity and metabolic issues, which create, opportunities, I guess, for surgery and for drugs and for processed food and all the rest of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah.
insurance
How do we
companies.
step out of it, right? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And this is, I think, education. I don't know of any more effective tool right now. And what we're doing, one interview after another, and hopefully, when you have, I'm so glad that my recent addiction focused interviews are getting thousands of views because, imagine every person that watched that interview, how many more people they might mention to or share it to
Yes.
so it's really I did not expect it because I know I usually get the most views, the most engagement on carnivore geared content, and I was a little bit apprehensive when I started doing the addiction interviews, and but I was completely surprised, pleasantly surprised that I think everybody is ready because they understand that it's not about what diet is, although I do think carnivore helps our brain health and everything. I think the future, the really the key here is the addiction. That's what,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's what most people are struggling with, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, really good point. And the addiction recovery protocol, how I was trained with Bitten, I really believe this, and I try and disseminate this information out there to anybody who will listen, is it's 10% the food plan. Like it's critical that we have a food plan that works, right? And it's got to get all the overlap on the Venn diagram, right? It's got to be nourishing. We've got to not be, too hungry or too full. We've got to have enough energy. And of course, we're want to be attractive. We want the right body composition, right? We want all of those things, which can be hard to get right, right? There's so much conflicting information out there. I mean, when I went carnivore, just before I went carnivore, I mean, I was sold on, okay, yeah, processed food is out, right? But vegetables, I mean, everybody knows that vegetables are good for you, right?
Right.
I never would have thought to eliminate those. I never would have thought that that would be a good thing, yet that was the one thing that was stopping me from really getting food neutrality and satiety and kind of optimizing my physiology and my mood, right? No
Yeah.
idea,
Yeah.
right?
Who
So
knew?
yeah, so
Right.
that's 10, but that's only 10%, right? Like that's the diet part,
Right.
okay? And then there's all the other socio, psychosocial, emotional components which really need to be addressed. Like how many times, are we stressed or bored and we go for a snack? I mean, we all do it, right? And
Yeah.
so how do we break that habit and what do we replace it with? Like when we're having a feeling. So that's the next 40% is how do we shift around the way we live each day, which is largely habitual and unconscious. 95% of what we're doing are actually often addictive habits. So becoming conscious and breaking them and starting new ones, that's a whole big thing.
Hmm.
That's the next 40%. And then the other 50% is support, like connecting with community of other people who are similarly wired, because we can feel very isolated and very alone often and very shamed, particularly when maybe 50% of the population in the world isn't addicted and can have, a chocolate raisin or two or a salad and feel fine. Right, we're like, what's wrong with me that I can't do that? And
Right.
we tend to think there's something wrong with me versus, oh, it's just that I'm left-handed or I have green eyes and I just need to live this way, and it's not about deprivation, it's just about normalizing and looking for the gift in it, and the sense of community and belonging that comes from being part of this tribe.
Yeah.
So all of that is really important. Yet most of us think we should do it alone, and that it's just a question of, oh, I just need to be on a diet and lose weight, and it
Yeah.
stops there. But it really doesn't. It's about everything else, right?
Yeah. And that's fantastic. You just answered my next question, which was what is the best way to get sober from addiction? So there you have it.
Yes, and many ways to do it, right? I mean, I think the bottom line is if we have addiction versus harmful eating, I think it's really important to be clear which is it, Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project, she wrote a very good blog about this, about are you an abstainer or are you a moderator? If
Mm.
you Google that quiz, are you an abstainer or moderator? She spells this out really nicely. Like if a moderator abstains, they're miserable. And if an abstainer tries to moderate, they're miserable. So
Mhm.
which are we? So if we've determined that we are addicted, okay, abstinence is the way it's got to be. No
But
problem. Let's just live like that. Yeah, go on.
I do want to argue with her a little bit in a
Okay,
very
go
friendly
on.
way. If you are miserable after abstaining from a drug, wouldn't that make you really an addict too?
Yes,
Right? Because it's
yes,
like if you tell me abstain from broccoli just because maybe broccoli isn't the best, I'll forget about it in 1 second, no problem.
yes, yes.
But if you're miserable, like then you're not really a moderator. You're still an addict. You know, and maybe it doesn't have
Totally.
the same negative consequences yet
Yes.
because maybe you're still young or some other protective factors, right?
Agreed. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
What was I going to say about that? But yes, so abstaining. Yeah. So, but the way by which we start abstaining can be a bit different, I think, depending on each person's individual circumstance. Like I worked with one client, bless his heart, who had eaten at McDonald's every day for 25 years
Mm,
and never drank any water and coffee, alcohol, processed food. Like for him to have gone cold turkey on day one, it would have been horrible. So he kind of weaned down for, I think it was 2 weeks, I think, off the coffee. Yeah, caffeine, we haven't talked about that. That's another
trigger.
really intense drug for many people, that can cause binging and all kinds of other problems. But anyway, so yeah, so like kind of gradually getting to abstaining with
Yeah.
a view again, not to being in denial. Oh, I'll just keep this, coveted, sweetener or whatever. It's like, no, it's got to go because it's just going to keep the addiction alive if we don't let it go.
Yeah.
But yeah, the physiology sometimes can be really, really harsh trying to do too much, like in the first day or week or month. So yeah, the weaning down
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be important. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely these drugs definitely have a hold on us, and I agree. I've done that in the past too. Like I've tapered down. But once I went cold turkey, it wasn't like because my body had already been in ketosis already, like it wasn't such a shock to my system. But yeah,
Yes.
but like you said, I think I watched that interview. It's on your channel, right? The
On
whole
my YouTube channel. Yes.
hmm so yeah, going from a lifetime of not doing anything within like the fitness lifestyle in terms of dieting or exercise or anything like that, to all of a sudden taking all that away overnight, yeah, you go into shock. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it can be hard. I mean, really, the headache and the withdrawal and all that can really,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
You gotta
So
take a few days off. That's what I recommend, right? Just
exactly.
plan.
Start it on a Friday and ideally take a week off work because it's serious, this physiological withdrawal,
Yes,
particularly in that first week. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Okay. Um, how long do you think it takes for brain chemistry to be restored after quitting the drugs?
Another great question. So, according to that definition that we read a while back from the American Association of Addiction Medicine, anywhere from 18 to 24 months. So, this is really long term. So, there's the acute withdrawal symptoms, which can be kind of in those first 30 days normally. Well, 10 days for sure. But then, yeah, the first 30 days can often be really tough. It's hard to know if it's physiological or behavioral or a bit of both.
Right.
But either way, expect the first 30 days to be unpleasant. But the post-acute withdrawal, that's a lot more sinister. And that's where the addictive thinking can really creep in there. And that's where it's so important to get the lifestyle habits and the support and really be changing kind of everything about your life to really habituate the new thoughts, the new behaviors, the new diet. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
18 to 24 months. It's a
Yeah.
long-term thing. This is not,
2 years. Yeah.
yeah, yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you really don't want to let your guard down. And even if we look at data, even from rats, it takes them 2 months out of a 2-year lifespan.
There we
So
go. It's the
it's
same ratio, right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, if so I did the math, it ends up being if we want to get like 100% brain chemistry rebalancing, it ends up being 7 to 10 years of a human's life for you to really get that perfect brain back again after sobriety.
Yes.
But when people hear that, and I don't like to use the 10-year mark, I generally stick with the 2 years because it seems like you'll get 90% of the restoration in 2 years, but then it keeps getting better, and that's a good thing,
Exactly.
and that's what we want. So, but yeah, I think that that first 2 years is so critical, which is why we hear it always in addiction. It's like if for severe addiction, like food addiction, ideally you would want to go away, be locked up in a way for 2 years so that your brain doesn't get any cues or triggers and allows that brain healing to happen in those 2 years, you know?
It would be so nice if we could do that.
Wouldn't it? Hundreds
Right.
of millions of Americans, where are we gonna put them? It's
Exactly.
insanity. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And
I think it's cheaper to go after the food industry, put them all to task and start suing them, just like we sued the tobacco companies, because clearly they are not capable of self-regulating. They know exactly what kind of business model they're in, especially at this point. Maybe they could have argued a few decades ago, definitely not now. They know exactly what they're doing.
absolutely. And to your point about your upcoming interview with Dr. Joan Iflin, she's done
I
an
did it already.
amazing. Have you done it? Oh,
Yeah,
oh
yeah,
my
yeah.
God.
It was like that just a few days ago. I posted. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I haven't been keeping up. I'll have to look at it. But yes, the whole food addiction or addiction business model, very deliberate. Yeah,
Five,
yeah.
the five A's, right? The age
Yes,
of
that's it.
onset, affordability. Let me see if I remember them. Advertising,
Yes.
availability. There's one more. Um,
Addictiveness, those addictive combos, those the six addictive sugar, flour, fat, salt,
Oh, right,
dairy,
right.
caffeine,
It's got to be
addictive
addictive,
compounds.
right? A for addiction, right? It's got to be addictive. So, that's yeah, like that's what the tobacco companies perfected. And then when they bought the food companies, they actually trained them and they showed them the 5A business model. Like you got to put something addictive in there. So, and the tobacco companies added nicotine. What's the purpose of adding nicotine? Just it's purely for the to hook you, without you even noticing that there's something in there. And that's
Yes,
what the food companies are doing now. What is the maximum amount of salt, fat, sugar, carbs we can add? And by the way, there's so many more now than just fat, salt, and sugar, like natural flavors, all those things. What is the
yes,
maximum amount that we can jam in there without you noticing?
yes,
That's the
yes,
goal.
exactly. Yet you just want more of it and you don't know why, right?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay. Anyway, let's talk about this is very, very interesting. And thank you for suggesting that, we bring this up because I don't think I've talked about this on my channel yet. What about eating disorders? How does dieting, binge eating, and restricting and a preoccupation with body image fit in with food addiction? Uh, I think we targeted a little bit the dieting component and the preoccupation with body image, but I don't think we did a real good distinction between eating disorders and addiction because I feel like there are two schools of thought right now. They're kind of like in war,
Yeah,
at war
yeah,
with one another. The eating addiction camp wants you to eat an Oreo with intention.
yes,
And we're like, no, 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 no. You don't give drugs to anybody who's struggling in any way, shape, or form, a drug that apparently seems to be far more addictive than heroin. So,
yes.
what do you say about that?
Oh, exactly. Yes. It is tricky because I think people can have a food addiction but not be eating disordered and the other way around. I think probably most of us have some blend of the two. Um, uh, I think I was diagnosed, as I said before, as an eating disorder, but the addiction component wasn't addressed in there. So I was miserably eating addictive foods and always feeling hungry and always overeating slightly because and battling all the time because, it's like an alcoholic trying to have, a bit of alcohol spread throughout the day, right? And I don't know how I didn't put it together, really.
Right.
Like I kind of did put it together, and then I think it just was dismissed, right? They're like, no, no, food's not addictive or whatever, right? Anyway, by the same token, so I was really relieved when I did my InFact training and then did my training with Bitten Janssen, because her refreshing take on it was she doesn't really believe in eating disorders. She's like, no, no, it's all food addiction, and these are process addictions, right? Like the process addiction of restricting or binging and purging and strong belief that so much of it starts and ends with the physiology, like that once that balances out and the blood sugar and we found our food plan and the good replacement behaviors and we've really holistically balanced out, that should clear up a lot of the other sort of comorbid quirky behaviors. So I was reassured by that, but then like I just said, I'd ended up losing a bit too much weight and some of my quirky OCD type things started to come up and
Mm.
what that looked like. And so I guess I'm thinking that that's, where an eating disorder can come into it,
Yeah.
that perspective, right? And for me, it did look like a fear of gaining weight. Actually, it was a fear of my weight changing at all. I got very like paranoid about the scale. I didn't want to weigh myself, and if I did, I'd get really panicky about it going up or down. Like it had to be just the same,
Right.
So again, that was kind of eating disordery, anorexic thinking.
Right.
And yeah, like an obsessive fear of weight gain for sure.
Yeah.
That was in there, kind of body checking, like, oh, am I gaining weight, and kind of paranoid if I've gone over, or yeah, if I'd gone over my weight and measured meal, I was thinking I was going to start gaining weight, that kind of thing. Like that, I think is could be lumped in there with an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of resources that I found that really helped me with this. Now, they don't address the food addiction component of it. So again, we kind of have to puzzle piece all of this stuff together to be meaningful. But this author is someone who recovered from anorexia. Her name's, where is it?
Tabitha Farrar.
Tabitha Farrar.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this is where I heard about this adaptation to flee mechanism, because she
Right.
was someone who developed anorexia, and even though she wanted to gain weight, or part of her wanted to, there was this terror that would come up, and she would do all these avoidant things to not eat, certain things or break the rules and this sort of thing. And anyway, so she talks about the neural pathway rewiring and just eating anyway, like just, and her thing though is to eat everything without restriction. I disagree with that. I do not think we should eat addictive foods without restriction. So for me, how I managed to sort of get better from this kind of OCD thing that I developed was to be willing to gain some weight and face my fear of it and start to do some rewiring, and which was talking about it, basically like admitting it, like, yeah, I'm actually afraid to gain weight, and I think if I gain 2 pounds, I'm going to be really unattractive, and I'm going to go over the top, and I'm going to start binging. Like I had a lot of irrational fears, so I talked about it with some of my peers who are in this world, eating disorder and food addiction world. And then she also had these other 2 books that were really helpful. Fear of weight gain. This is another really good one. So again, it talks about the obsession our society has with thinness.
Right.
Even again, within the recovery community of people healing from eating disorders, we're highly sensitive as anorexics in particular, looking to gain weight, to our mentors and therapists and so on, going, okay, well, you want to gain weight, but not too much weight now. Like, oh, you're kind of at the upper limit. Well, let's start scaling down on your snacks. I mean, there's this implicit bias towards thinness
Right.
we systemically kind of infiltrate. So that's there.
Yeah.
So kind of going against that. And then this other one, I don't know if you can see it, neural rewiring for eating disorder recovery. So it gives some really good tips and tricks for what to do with those fear-based thoughts as they start to come up, as we're, eating more, or exercising less, or doing whatever it is that we need to do to gain that little bit of weight, or to stop with the OCD behaviors around being so vigilant around eating certain things at certain times. So for me, what I did was moved into more unrestricted keto eating. Instead of the 3 weighted measured meals per day, it was like, no, I'll have those as a guideline or as a minimum, and then challenge myself to eat an extra meal, or to eat a little bit more, or to eyeball it on the plate, and just breathe through the anxiety that would come up around breaking those anorexic rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely
Yeah.
does. Yeah, it's there's so many layers to this, and I don't I don't know personally a lot of recovering anorexics, but I have interviewed one. Her name is Claire. She's in France. Her Instagram is Lolly, LOLLI_Carney. And she actually went through, the whole hospital feeding situation
Mm,
where they put her on like all the soy-based solutions and it was like horrific. And
yeah.
of course you gain weight, right? But you're they're still like you're not healed. And then eventually she actually regained the weight and she's at a perfectly healthy weight. She feels comfortable and she feels happy and she's not food obsessed anymore. And she tackled it with a very focused carnivore,
Yeah.
sober approach. And her, I mean, and I'm so happy for her because her YouTube channel is doing so well because
Right.
it's such a it's a rare find, to see such a complete different approach to treating an eating disorder compared to the mainstream, where it's like
Yes.
it's okay to have the Oreos, it's okay to have the, all of the stuff, and yeah, it's hard to convince somebody, any person of that, let alone somebody who is especially wary of those kinds of foods. And I don't think we need to be convinced that Oreos are fine. There's no reason to put that in our bodies, you know?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. The other thing that, sorry, I'll mention about this, which I think was very helpful, is we can be anorexic, um, like at any weight,
Hmm.
even, depending, it doesn't have to be the skeletal kind of look where people are, remarking and needing to be hospitalized. Someone can look normal weight or even slightly overweight, but still be triggering the anorexia, thinking and behavior and the body dysmorphia and the fear, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah,
That
again, I
is very
wanted to,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I've never heard of that before. So it's more of like you could actually have the same kind of brain that an
yes.
anorexic has, but not really look very, skeletal or very emaciated.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And again, because society has done all this mapping onto us about what is the right body type, and for many of us, we would be really severely anorexic, and if we looked like what the magazines and various
Hmm.
icons are out there, but we can
Right,
be anorexic even if we don't look like that
right.
in terms of body fat percentage for a particular individual. Some of us are wired to carry more
Yeah.
weight than others, and that's okay. That's the
Right.
point.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, especially I think, oh yeah, because like for example, I grew up in the era of the wave, right? Like in the 90s where, I never saw so I'm from Lebanon originally. So over there, it's you generally tend to have an hourglass figure, so
It's
very wide
beautiful.
hips, Well, I never thought that, because I never saw that on any magazine cover or any actress. It was completely absent from any sort of
Media.
media or any place where where it would be like the ideal of what feminine beauty was, so it was only that like if you were tall, very, very thin, and preferably with very little curves. The less, the better. Like that was the goal, you know?
Right.
So
Yes.
imagine how harsh you as a teenager, how sensitive you would be to those kinds of messaging. Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's what I love now about there is a lot more. I know there are some negative things about the body positivity movement when it's taken to an extreme right now a little bit in certain pockets where it's like it's okay to be 500 pounds and that's fine, because it's body positivity. So I think that I don't think that's a healthy message. But the good thing about the body positivity movement is that now all body shapes are celebrated and we can see beauty in different body shapes because they're all beautiful you
Yeah.
know I can see the beauty in Cameron Diaz, and I can also see the beauty in Jennifer Lopez, or like I see
Absolutely.
they're all
Yeah.
beautiful. So um and that's a good thing. So that's lucky for the new generation. I wasn't that lucky. you know
Right, exactly.
yeah,
Hopefully, again, through podcasts like this one,
yeah,
we're having this conversation now, right? And calling it out and naming it, thank goodness, right? And hopefully there
exactly.
can be some alternatives, and we can lead by example, right? By changing our own thinking and our own behavior, and hopefully help others to not have to suffer in the same way that we have, right?
Ag- Agreed, 100%. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a maintenance program for recovery. So let's say you've gone over and you've done the work, right? The abstinence, you've got the biopsychological, right?
Yeah.
Elements. You're paying attention to those things, and then you also are paying attention to the support meetings and getting support in whichever way you can. So you've got that 50%, 40%, and 10% abstinence. Okay,
Yeah.
now what? What about after that 2-year mark?
Great question. I mean, essentially, that's it. Like, that just becomes our new normal. That's our life, right? There is no, oh, I'll go back to the way it was. It's like, no, no, this is who I am now. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Oops,
someone who,
sorry. I had an alarm clock, but I thought that if you put your phone on silent, it overrides it. Apparently not. Sorry about that. Yes.
it's all good. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. It's like a day at a time, to quote a 12-step model, like we live like this for the rest of our lives. Yeah.
So, okay, so this is something you have to be vigilant about all your life, pretty much.
Absolutely. Yeah, just like someone who's left-handed and learns to write with their left hand, it's not like, oh, okay, we're done now. We're going to switch over to our right hand to be like everybody else. It's like, no, no, you're left-handed. It's okay.
Right.
Just that's how you write.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it takes work. It does get easier though, right? Because in the beginning when
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes, like anything, like anything that we do on a repeated basis, it just becomes automatic, and then it just becomes part of our character and who we are.
Right.
Like I mentioned before, I'm somewhere between 27, 28 years that I haven't had alcohol or other drugs. I don't think about it. It doesn't tempt me. I'm completely neutral in that regard. I can be in a bar, I can be at a wedding, there can be people drunk around me. I can be miserable, I can be happy. It just doesn't even enter my mind, to want to take a drink. Like, it's gone. And I know people who have been in food addiction recovery for 20, 30, 40 years. Same thing. It's like they just eat what they eat and that's it. Like, food is food.
Yeah.
There is no temptation, there is no nothing. And I must say, like, now that I've been keto carnivore for as long as I have, well, now that I'm weight restored and, with which took a bit. I would get binging tendencies and start to look at some foods and be like, oh, I want that. But again, it was more of a starvation response rather than addiction response, if that makes sense. But it would be like looking at this and thinking I want to eat it. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I look at packaged food, whatever, and it's just, it doesn't have any kind of
Yeah.
temptation.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. Like I understand exactly what you mean. Especially after um time goes on, especially after that physiological detox happens, and you
Yes,
literally look at it and it's like cardboard to you, the food that's not food to you
yes.
anymore, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't look like food. It's not an option. You wouldn't consider it. And it's funny, because I've had people congratulate me over the years, like, oh, well done, you haven't drank. It's like, well, it's sort of like congratulating me for not jumping off a building. Like,
Yeah,
I don't want to jump off a building. I'm not thinking about it all the time. It's easy for me to not want to do that, right? So,
right, right. It's not like you're struggling with it every day. And it's
yeah,
like, hey, congratulations, you did one more day.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it really does go away. I think as long as we really embrace the fact of, like, particularly at the beginning, if we are feeling insecure or deprived or different or whatever, there will be that grieving period if it's something that we've really enjoyed or been a crutch or it's been filling in a gap. For
yeah.
sure, there's the adjustment period, but once that's over, as long as we don't keep going back to it,
Mm,
it is going to go away. So that's the hard part, I think, for many of us, is knowing that it is forever. It's like a fish allergy, right? Like, if you've been off fish for 5 years or 50 years, it doesn't matter. If you pick up fish again, it's not going to be good. So
right.
just forget about the freaking fish.
Right, right, right. Find something that's just as exciting, you
Yeah,
know?
just live
And
without it. Exactly. Build your life around something else.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay. And I'm it's funny because remember we were talking before and I thought you were in Ireland because of the Zoom time, time zone. And but you're actually in England and but it's still I'm interested in looking at other countries and how the state of food addiction is. So Do they talk about it? Is it a thing compared to here in the United States? Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, what a great question. So I think it's the same as far as I can tell everywhere in the world. We're fighting collectively to get food addiction as a recognized syndrome in the Diagnostic Statistics Manual as well as the ICD-11. I've been part of, well, peripherally of a task force of professionals who have been lobbying to get it in there. It was denied last time, but we're going ahead, retweeting it and getting it resubmitted. So hopefully it will be in there. So no, it's not recognized as a thing, you know, in terms of a formal medical diagnosis. It will be so much more helpful if it is in there, because that way, you know, there may be more access to treatment for insurance,
Yeah,
recognition, more training with doctors
yeah,
and so on. That being said, there's certainly, thanks to podcasts like yours and just the flood of awareness and the InFact School and Bitten's, you know, work out there, you know, for years, there is a lot more anecdotal sort of clinical evidence of this, and a lot of really good grassroots movements that are popping up all over the place. So here in England, there's a charity that I just love, and they're actually having a conference, annual conference in May in Sheffield. It's called the Public Health Collaboration.
I've
It's
heard of that. Yeah.
Yes, phcuk.org is the website, and that's a really impressive consortium of doctors and really progressive health professionals who are working together to educate people on a low carb lifestyle. Dr. David Unwin and Jennifer Unwin, who live here in England, they're two friends of mine. They're fabulous. So he runs a diabetes clinic
Okay.
focused on low carb eating, and she's a clinical psychologist, and they're husband and wife, and they've teamed up to deal with the addictive part. And
Mm,
so she sort of, sorry, she focuses on more of the food addiction recovery component, the psychology of it, whereas he's more on the physiological, you know, doing the blood tests and the measurements and showing, you know, the changes in liver function and, you know, blood, doing the continuous glucose monitoring, all of that kind of thing to help people on the physical side. But again, as we've just been talking about, you know, we need both in order to have the long-term education sustainability to get to the point where we are addiction free and prefer our lives like that, so that we wouldn't go back, what we were
yeah.
just talking about. Anyway, there's quite a few doctors here, and there's been quite a lot of traction and some really positive media linking food addiction and, you know, the metabolic problems and mood problems and so on here. So slowly but surely there's more and
Happen.
more
Yeah.
awareness, but
It
we're
has
not
to
quite there
happen.
yet.
It blows my mind how caffeine addiction can be in the DSM-5, but not food addiction.
Yes.
You know?
And yes, I didn't know that was in there, and that's fabulous, because if caffeine is in there, sugar has to be on its
It's
heels. My
it's
God.
way, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, just look, I don't know. It's especially with the work of Dr. Iflin's, literally looking at the 11 criteria that would allow a substance to be entered into the DSM-5. It's like every single criteria is checked with food addiction and sugar
Yes.
addiction. So
Yes.
it's, yeah, like you said, it's just a matter of time. The only thing is what I tell my audience, like, you don't have to wait. This
Exactly.
information, or the studies are there already, just like when we had the tobacco studies, knowing just how detrimental and how addictive they were. It wasn't until 30 years later that the laws changed, and so do you really want to waste your life away knowing this? And then, when you get older and the laws are passed, you're gonna remember that you knew this, but you just didn't take it seriously.
Yes.
So it's what, and another thing that I wanted to mention, it is very important that this gets recognized because it has a lot of implications. So I know that I have a client of mine whose daughter also is addicted to food. I mean, so many kids are addicted. It's incredible, and it's sad. And the ex-husband doesn't care. Like,
Mm,
so on the weekends, we're trying to talk to her about addiction, trying to change her meal plan and everything. But then it's hard for the parents because they don't like each other too much. It's hard for them to agree, especially given that the dad doesn't care and he'll feed his daughter whatever. And he's,
oh,
you know, So
Yeah.
now when we put this in the DSM-5, it's like, no, I'll take you to court. This is child abuse at this point. But now what can the mother do? She can't say you're not going to see your daughter. So yeah,
Yes.
it has a
Yeah.
lot of real life implications.
Agreed.
Um, Alrighty, so this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane, for sharing all of this wisdom with us. Is there anything that I missed or anything that you would like to add?
Mm, um, thank you. It's been fabulous talking with you. I guess just know that you're not alone. If you're listening to this and you've been struggling in any of the ways that we've discussed and thinking that there's something wrong with you, know that there's way more, way more, way more right with us than there is wrong, and that you're absolutely not alone. And it's just a question of talking about it, letting somebody know, letting someone like us know, what you're struggling with. There's a ton of help out there. Some of it's paid, a lot of it's free. I've got some good resources on my website, which is jaynesaddiction.com. And Jayn is spelled, I don't know if you can see my name on there, but Jayns, addiction. Yeah, some questions on there for you to do like a quick survey. It's the Hoffman 6-question screening to see if you may have addiction or not. I always do a complimentary 30-minute consult, and I'm happy to chat with anybody just to, again, provide you with that, it's okay, that reassurance, there is help, and point you in a direction that will hopefully, be helpful depending on what you're struggling with. If it's more on the eating disorder side, or if you think it's the food addiction side, or a combination of both, there is help. And life is amazing, actually. Like once we know what we're dealing with, and then can do something about it. Yeah, I think that's the hard part, is trying to battle this, thinking that there's something wrong, when really, it's just addiction. It's not a big deal. you know
Right.
yeah,
And
just
I
lean
mean, look
into it.
around you. Everybody's addicted. So it's like,
Everybody's addicted.
that's the
Everybody's
norm.
addicted to something. It is the norm. Oh, and actually, sorry, yes, I should mention this. One of the best books I have read about addiction and the whole dopamine model, and is a book written by Dr. Anna Lemke, Lembke, I
Okay.
think. Yeah, and I've actually done a book review in 3 parts on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is just, if you just type in Jayn Steele YouTube, it should come up. But God, she's done a good job of showing how, again, we can be addicted to anything and everything. Like, she's a Stanford psychiatrist, professor, something or other, professor of addiction, and she talks about her own addiction to reading romance novels. Gabor Mate, he's another leader in the whole addiction awareness movement, who talks about being addicted to buying classical music. And at first, it's very easy to sort of dismiss these as, like, oh, whatever, addiction, But when he starts talking about, being at the Magic Flute, obsessing about, buying a Mozart collection for $7,000 when he has one unopened in the garage that he paid $7,000 for, and he's got a patient, because he's a medical doctor, who's in labor and he can't bring himself to get out of the store. Now we start to see the implications of what addiction really is, right? And what it can look like if it goes unaddressed. And we can be addicted to anything. So her book talks about that. Masturbation addicts, right? You name it, and really reduces the stigma, and gives us a solution, which is all the things that we've been talking about, right? Bring it into the light. Recognize what are the behaviors or substances we need to abstain from, and what are some healthy alternatives, and to not do it alone. So yeah, I definitely recommend people, either watch those interviews and or read her book. Very, very
Yeah.
helpful. The subtitle is, it's called Dopamine Nation: Finding Balance in an Age of Indulgence.
Yeah.
Really good read. Yeah.
Yeah. I've listened to well, I've watched a bunch of her interviews with Rich Roll and
Yes.
on the
Yes.
Huberman Lab. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those were really good. I haven't actually read the book, but depends on, what anybody's listening would prefer. Some people prefer, because like when I'm running and I love my, my treadmill is right next to me here.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of podcasts,
Exactly. Yeah, who
So
can sit still and read? That can be tricky. Audiobooks, awesome. Podcasts, perfect,
right,
right?
right. So for me, that works. Some people, love to have the physical copy of the book, not even like a Kindle. Like, I want the book. And so there you have it. You have all these options. There's so much content that we're putting out. And, people like Jane, like Bitten, like Dr. Vera Tarman and Dr. Joan Iflin, Mike Collins. I mean, I'm trying to get everybody on my channel. So you have all of these people that you know about now, and you can go and check them out. And I'm gonna make sure, Jane, that I put all of your links in the description box, so your website, your YouTube, everything. So it's very easy to find you and to find also all of those people. And just you gotta immerse yourself right in this world if you want to stand a chance, especially in the beginning. And like we said, it gets easier, and
Yes,
you can create a life that's far more exciting, that's sober, and that's truly happy, and where you're not a slave to that addiction.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today, Sarah.
Ditto. Thank you
That's
so
good work.
much, Jane. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for sticking with us to the end. If you enjoyed this type of content, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.